We're live? All right. Welcome, everybody. Fortunately, we weren't able to meet last week. We had a thing come undone, but it's all looks like it's working now. Rabbi Roy is not able to meet with us tonight. He's picking up his sister at the airport. Their plane got delayed, and he was the only one able to go and grab them. So he's with us in spirit, and he had a couple questions he wanted us to answer that he got sent last minute, so we will get to those. But other than that, do we have any other announcements? Are we ready to just go in?
We're ready to go.
Let's go.
All right. Well, if you are new to the program, this is Digging Deeper. We are going through chapter 26 of Matthew at the moment, and several people are sending in questions to ask the rabbi, the pastor, and the rabbi. And it's pretty much open to whatever questions you have. They get them sent throughout the week. If you have a question you'd like to send in, we've got a QR code that'll be on the screen periodically. It goes to the email is roygarciasa@gmail.com. And we've got a telephone number you can call. But getting into... Oh, yeah, it's right there. So getting into the first question we have tonight, it's from Rose that actually attends here at Boker Shabbat. That's the Saturday morning service. And she says, I see on YouTube many Jews and Christians celebrating Purim, but dressing up like Madonna or very questionable, not Christ-like figures. Has the world entered into our Purim and other holidays? Doesn't this bring down the true meaning? Now, this is a classic question that Christians have been asking for years about like Halloween and Christmas and all kinds of things. So for a Jewish holiday, first of all, can we ask, what is Purim? And why are people dressing up? And are there rules to it? What's going on?
Right. Okay, good question. So this is from Purim is about the book of Esther. And so we read from Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther. One of the things that's interesting about reading from the book of Esther is this is the only book in the entire Bible that doesn't have God's name in it. And he's behind the scenes throughout the book. I think that it's one of the important lessons that even though you don't see his name there, he's still working there. But because of that, there's a lot of things that's one of the reasons that, for instance, when we say God's name, it's very, or when we read God's name, it's supposed to be something it's very sacred. In Jewish tradition, we say Adonai, Hashem. Adonai means my master, Hashem, and we even see this in the Greek New Testament. They use the word kurios and theos for Lord and God, and they don't refer to God's actual name, so they use this out of respect. So it's something very respectful when you're reading God's name. Now, Purim is interesting because you have a scroll up here that doesn't have God's name, so people tend to be. You don't have that same. It's different. You could read every single word the way it's written, and the dressing up is something that came in a bit after, but it's consistent with the story because it talks about how we will have. It talks about the Feast of Purim in the book of Esther. So during Purim, we read about the Feast of Purim. And so traditionally there's this idea in the book of Esther of being hidden, things being, there's a word that's used in the book of Esther that talks about being hidden and almost disguised, and this is where we get the traditions from. And so there's this tradition of even Esther's name was not her full name, her real name. Her name was Hadassah, and she went by Esther. This was something different. This was almost like a different facade that she had on her.
Okay. So just to follow, so the Feast of Purim, that's the celebrating the story of Esther.
That's yes.
And Haman and the attempted genocide of the Jews and how God saved them.
That's right.
In the book of Esther, and that's the Feast of Purim is remembering that event.
Exactly. And so, and it's supposed to be a time of where you just, it's probably one of the more festive times, and it's mentioned, the festivities are mentioned in the book of Esther. Now, today, there are questionable things that they get dressed up in. Now, I will say that, here at our congregation, for instance, we always say if you're going to get dressed up in something kosher. So if it's going to be what is kosher mean kosher? Just something that's appropriate. So we like to have something that's appropriate, and but the main thing, one way or the other, the main part of this is at the end of the day, even though we have all these festivities, the main thing is to keep God at the center. Even though he's not mentioned there, we say that God is behind everything. So can people get caught up in the side things? Yes, but that can happen also in most holidays. This could happen in, we see several religious holidays that have been taken over by the world, like there are some things that are meant to celebrate Jesus, but instead are celebrating other things and becoming that. So yeah, we just have to be careful to keep God in our center. So yeah, it could get distracting. We do need to keep God in our center. Good question. Is there? Yeah.
No,
go ahead.
I think, like I said, I think a lot of Christians can sympathize with that. There's, Christmas is the obvious one that's supposed to be about giving and things, and it became very much a, well, what am I going to get, as secular people try to commandeer it. I mean, Halloween is literally a religion that was originally intended to celebrate the martyrs of Christ. That's why it's called Hallows Eve, and then the next day is All Martyrs Day.
Right. Even in Hebrew, it's called that, right?
There you go. And then it all became about, let's celebrate demons and stuff. Thanksgiving used to be a day where a week that you celebrated by fasting, and somehow it got converted to the day where you stuff your face as much as you possibly can. So everything, as you get more secular, it just kind of inverts everything.
Right. So it's just, you're right. It's something we need to just keep our compass there. That's a great question, a great point, Rose.
Did you have any comments you want to make, or am I good to move on? Okay. So we're getting into chapter 26, and we're into verse 31 and 32. Here we are at the garden, and Jesus being betrayed. So we have, then Yeshua said to them, "This very night you will all fall away on the account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." So we had a question on this one, because this is a little bit before the betrayal. Said, my Bible notes say Jesus is referencing Zechariah 13:7 here. Why is that he's referencing that verse? It says, is there something special about this verse? Is there some special context that I'm missing out as a Gentile the disciples would have picked up on? For them, would it have been some mind-blowing moment, like when Sherlock Holmes reveals the twist villain in a movie? I know he's not, but from my perspective, it sounds like he's just quoting a random verse. So am I just missing something because I don't have the background?
Well, Zechariah 13:7 says, "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones." What he was preparing, it was more of he was preparing them that something was about to happen where he was going to be struck. He was going to be the one literally taken out of being able to function at all in their midst. He was going to be removed and killed. And that was going to be a devastating thing to them. It was going to cause them to be scattered, to not know what to do, and they did. I mean, some went fishing, some went on a walking to the road to Emmaus. I mean, they were kind of like lost. They didn't know what to do. In that period of time, Peter denies him 3 times. The one that said, I would never deny, because there's something happens when the shepherd was. So you take that into the natural. Here's a flock of sheep out on a mountainside, and let's just say a wild animal attacks the shepherd. So now there's no one there to protect the sheep. So what happens to the sheep? They just run in every which direction, and they become vulnerable. And he was just preparing them for what was about to take place. And now notice, because he doesn't leave them only thinking this is going to be bad, because he said, but I'm coming back and I will meet you in Galilee. So it's just a short time where you're going to be scattered, but I'm going to be there and I'm going to pull you back together, and everything's going to be okay. That was the kind of the context of what he was saying to them.
Yeah, exactly. And additionally, excuse me, additionally, we have Zechariah 13:7. It starts talking about that starting from verse 7, it goes through all the way to chapter 14:9. That's all like one portion right there. And what that's talking about, it's the beginning of this long paragraph that goes all the way to chapter 14:9, and that is a kind of a preamble for the very last part of the book of Zechariah, which talks about end times, where everyone will attack Jerusalem, and then they'll come later, the people who are remaining in Zechariah 14:16. This is all part. So keep in mind that these chapters are somewhat arbitrary, and so really you have. This is starting from verse 7 all the way through 14:9 is one part, and then after that you just have the ending of the book of Zechariah. It talks about all the nations coming against Jerusalem, and then the people who are remaining will come to worship together. And then it talks about, we have a verse from there that we actually say at the end of a prayer. It says that they will all, I'm looking for it, says Zechariah 14. It says, so basically it talks about how everyone will be worshiping together at once. And during the Feast of Sukkot, one of the things that's also interesting is that even though this is all happening during Passover, there's a lot of imagery from Sukkot, interestingly enough. We know it's on Passover. We know they had the Passover Seder. We know this happened. But there's also imagery from Sukkot, like the palms. That's something when they say Hoshiana, save us now, that's something that we say on Sukkot. So even though it's Passover, we have imagery from Sukkot, because Sukkot is related to the end of the book of Zechariah. It's like...
Is that a promise?
It's an interesting thing. It'd be like singing, like that New Year's song, da da na 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 na, like on the 4th of July. You're like, wait, what's going on here? Is this like a new beginning or something? You'd want to know this. And so we have these elements of Sukkot from the end of the book of Zechariah that we, like Palm Sunday, like saying Hosanna, that's from Sukkot there. And this is another thing from this great Sukkot. So to answer your question a little bit more briefly, it says Zechariah 13:7, that's the beginning of the end of the book of Zechariah, where it talks about the end times and this great feast where everyone comes together. So there's something very rich here, yes.
Okay. And as a reminder for people in the audience, when you say Sukkot, that's not the holiday they're celebrating right now, because right now they're doing Passover.
Right now you're right. Right now we're in the counting of the Omer, which is between Pesach, which is Passover, and Shavuot, which is Pentecost. So the counting of the Omer is how we determine when Pentecost has. That's why in Acts 2 it says,
when the day of Pentecost had come to completion. Like this, what they're talking about, the counting of the Omer. That's what we're doing right
And
now.
what's the word omer mean?
Omer is just like a sheaf of. It's a farmer's term, and so this is what we do is we count the days. That's where Pentecost. It comes from the word Pentecostes is 50, and so you're counting 50 days after Passover. And so that's the counting. We do that in our service at the end. Will Hoffman, he comes up here, he goes, it's the 37th day of the Omer, or the 40th day of the Omer, and that's what we do.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So to try to sum up both of your guys' comments, that since my assumption would be the disciples would be familiar with the story of Zechariah. They grew up in this culture. It's not something that they were like, hey, we've been secular Jews and we haven't really been going to church. They're already religious guys who would be familiar with this story.
Right. The closest thing to a secular Jew is maybe a Sadducee, but even then they were the priests. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So when to sum up your guys' comments, you have Jesus. He might have you say his main concern is like, I know you're about to have some trouble, and I need to give you some guidance. So there are several stories he could have referenced. He's not specifically referencing Zechariah because I'm revealing something special to you right now about Zechariah that I've been holding back. He could have referenced another story. He just chose Zechariah.
Because of the words.
Yeah, much like if you asked a pastor for help or something like that, or some kind of advice, he might reference one story of the Bible versus another, whatever he felt led by the Spirit to say what he thought would be most helpful for you. And to your point on the question of does it have deeper meaning that a Gentile might miss out on, because it's a section that is referenced a lot of time in liturgy, they would get the references. They would say, okay, wait, he's doing a New Year's reference here. It's not just that there's another layer to this. It's not just, oh, it's an encouraging thing, but there's also, he's referencing a story that has beginning.
It's an eschatological reference. It's an end times reference where he's saying, hey, this is the beginning of the end. Yeah.
That's interesting. Especially since we have grown up on the book, chapter, verse cut up, we're so accustomed to quoting a verse and just assuming that's how it's always been. Whereas when Jesus is referencing this verse, he's like, okay, well, I'm referencing this verse, but we all know this is just the opening lines for this entire story.
Right.
So it'd be more like if for our culture, it'd be like referencing a famous line in a movie. Well, we all know that I'm not just referring to that line in the movie. I'm just, for shorthand, making a quick reference to put the entire movie in your head right now.
Mm-hmm.
But since they didn't have the book, chapter, verse references, they just kind of, here's the key thing that we all remember as the starting point to reference this thing. That's really neat.
Mm. It's really interesting stuff.
All right. So moving on to chapter 26, verses 33, says Peter, and this is Peter's response. Peter said to him, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Truly I tell you, Yeshua declared, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter replied, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. And all the other disciples said the same thing. So we have another person here from Baruch Hashem, asked, given all the talk about the Pope in recent weeks, why is Peter the one shouting out here? We don't hear a record of the others shouting in disagreement or trying to outdo Peter. It says the others said things, but he's singled out. Was Peter the leader of the disciples, like Catholics say, or was he just one amongst the equals, as the Orthodox say? Would they, as Jews, have a different way of looking at their working relationship?
Well, Peter did have a role of leadership among them and would later become the pastor there in Jerusalem. I think part of it, too, was you just have to know his personality. He was brash. He would always be the first one. He was the one that heard the revelation that Jesus was going to build his church on the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that he heard that from Father. And then he turns right around and he gets rebuked because he was trying to keep him from going to the cross. So he was always the one on the edge, You know, you see it again when they got to the tomb, when he was told that Jesus had resurrected. John stopped and looked in. Peter just rushed in. So part of why he spoke up the way he does, part of it is just his personality. That's who Peter was. But the others had the same question. The others had the same viewpoint. The others were saying the same thing. They just weren't the one that would always just shout out as Peter would. Not necessarily because he's something special, just because that's his personality, much as anything.
What I remember about this is that this at the Church of Caiaphas, they built a church at this location, and the symbol on the church is a rooster. I thought that he has to live down that his whole life. But what I noticed about the church is that this is where they put Christ into prison. And remember, we went into there, and I thought that was really interesting. That you're in, of course, now they made it a stairway in there, but in prison they just dropped you down a hole. And you look up and you see this little hole. It's interesting to be in the same spot where Christ was waiting trial at the and they built a church at this particular location with, like I say, with the rooster. But as I said last time, that all the disciples fled but John. He's the only one that stayed through the whole crucifixion, and the only one that never get martyred.
Right. So this is a really this is a great question because it talks about the difference between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox, and well, there's several types of Orthodox churches, but we'll talk about the Eastern Orthodox right now. And one of the things that's very a lot of the language and the framing of the papacy was a Roman framing. For instance, the word pontiff, which we taught that Pontifex Rex is a pontiff, comes from the word bridge, because even if you speak Spanish, you hear the word puente. Puente comes as in pontiff, bridge. Why? Because they're talking about the bridge in this is a Roman term about the leader of Rome, because you have the so a lot of the framing of what the papacy is in Roman terms, which is why this is part of the Roman Catholic perspective, and so it talks about was he the leader of the disciples? There's no indication that Peter himself was a particular leader. For instance, John was called the beloved. And so someone might argue, well, isn't John the leader because John was called the beloved? John was also, by the way, the only one who died of a natural death, although he was in exile. Every other disciple was murdered for their faith. And so there is no script. It says, upon this rock I'll build my church. When we read that, what's interesting, when we first read that about Peter, Petros is rock, this is where a lot of the papacy claims come from. Upon this rock I'll build my church. That's was said in Caesarea Philippi. Now, for some context, Caesarea Philippi is at the foot of the largest rock in all of Israel, which is Mount Hermon. It's the highest peak there. It's a mountain peak. And then the transfiguration happens right after that, likely on Mount Hermon and not Mount Tabor. That's a rabbi hole. I'm not going to go down there another rabbit hole.
Yeah, I was about to ask a question. Was like, no, I probably shouldn't.
Yeah, and so, but the thing is, when he said, "Upon this rock I will build my church." So an interesting thing about when he tells Peter that is the largest rock in the Promised Land. It's the northern border of the Promised Land, and so people will say, "Oh, he's talking about Peter himself." It's a play on words, then yet another thing is he's literally at the foot of the largest mountain, the largest rock in all of Israel. So maybe he's using language in that way, but yeah, I can't hear you. Oh, the gates of hell will not prevail against you. Yeah, another thing, the gates of Hades will not prevail against you. At the foot of Mount Hermon and Caesarea Philippi, you have what they call it the gates of Hades, and you have a temple to Pan and over there, and so really that discussion with Peter makes sense when you look at their geographic location. So here's I'm not gonna. I will just say that there is a lot of the framing, even from the language of pontiff, that comes from Roman from a Roman heritage. And so it says, would they as Jews look different way of looking at their working relationship? I'll be honest, this is the beginning of the rabbinic eras. You had Hillel and Shammai, which were great Jewish thinkers before Yeshua, that Yeshua actually refers to. The scribes refer to Hillel and Shammai's arguments in asking Yeshua to resolve them. So I'm saying this rabbinic Judaism has already began. Yeshua is called rabbi. It's like pre-rabbinic Judaism. Yeshua is called rabbi himself. And so the Jewish view of things would be who's the leader. And they only called Yeshua rabbi there. They never called Peter that. Anyways, great question. I hope so. Basically, they most likely saw him as one of their equals. A lot of the framing of and the language came centuries later, but I mean, there's still a lot of respect for Peter. Obviously, I don't mean to downplay him by any means. He's a great worker who gave his life for that cause, and I just think that. There's just different cultural aspects. The Jewish perspective would be like, hey, we're more equivalent than the later Roman perspective would see him as a leader.
Nice. Bobby had a question or comment?
Yeah, Peter, he seemed to be part. He was given revelation knowledge about bringing in the Gentiles, and Paul was too. So there were several men. They all had disagreements, but they all had revelation knowledge given to them from God. I have one question to y'all, though, about the cock in the yard. I heard, see if y'all have ever heard of this. One guy stated that back in biblical times in the temple, that they had a temple crier, and they called him the cock, and that every morning that he would call people to prayer. Is there any truth to that you know of?
So the question was, he's heard that there was a temple crier, like a person who yells out to announce prayer time. That person was called the rooster, the cock.
Right.
That person would cock-a-doodle-doo, a.k.a.
Right.
call everybody to come to do prayer.
That I've heard that. I haven't looked it in the original Greek, but I could look it up while we're moving on with some of the other things. Let me look into the original Greek and see what I could find here. But just a quick thing, just to clarify something I said before, again about the pontiff, or it was from the Pontifex Maximus, which meant the chief pontiff. It came from these words. This is the Roman high priest.
Yeah,
this is before Christianity, and so this is a Roman high priest, and then the etymology was later used for under the Christian one.
Yeah,
and
the Roman high priest is interesting because, amongst other things, one of their chief functions was to actually operate the calendar and make sure like all the leap years and all the days weren't getting off and such, which has its own rabbit trails of funny stories. But I think what happened was when the what we know of today as the Pope was there, that person was appointed the position of high priest. So the Pontifex Maximus was held by one of the consuls, then it was held by just a person of honor. Then eventually it was the emperor who got to hold that position, and then once the emperor is gone, well, the Pope was the only one that seemed to be reasonable to have as that person. Right. And so the office just became synonymous with the Pope.
Right. Exactly. So again, a lot of the framing of that is Roman. Right. I'll be looking up the
Yeah.
question when we move on to.
Well, one thing I think at the bottom of this, you know, I think one of the classic errors that has occurred is that the idea that the church would be built upon a mortal person, not upon the Christ, the Son of the living God. And I think what you build upon man is going to have its weaknesses and faults, but you build upon the Christ because he was the anointed son of Adam. That's he's the only foundation, and it's what he said in Ephesians. He is the only foundation upon which this is built. And so one of the things that I feel like, is that we can't put Peter in a place that he was the rock in the sense of the foundation stone on which everything is built. That's the Christ, the Son of the living God. He's the only one that can take that place. So I think it's a critical error, because then, so now what we do, we build everything on man, and we've taken people away from the total trust and confidence and relationship with the Christ.
It actually segues really nicely into the next question we had, which this one I had to paraphrase because this is one that Rabbi Roy got over the phone just today, and so he had to tell it to me over the phone. So this is from Debbie. So Debbie, I apologize if I've misquoted you. This is a paraphrase. Sure, her question was, what is the Protestants' view of the Pope? Do Protestant churches also recognize him as head of the church, even though they have different doctrinal beliefs? Do they just respect him as a spiritual leader, but not their leader? What is the Protestant view of the Pope? And what's your guys' view of the Pope?
We just see him as the leader of the Catholic Church. We don't see him as a leader that leads us in any way. We try not to be unkind and say we don't listen to him or respond to anything. I do pay attention, and we do pray, because he does carry a lot of weight, carries a lot of political weight. And I know that, there was a lot of concerns with this transition, that we were going to hopefully move away from some of the woke policies and move into some of the more traditional values. And I don't know if that's going to occur or not. So all I want to say is we pay attention, but not in the sense that I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to incorporate whatever he says, and I want to make that the foundation of what I'm teaching or preaching. I don't see it that way. And I think I speak for many Protestant pastors. We're aware of what he's saying. We pray that he would have wisdom and guide his people in a proper way. But we see him; he's leading that group of Christians that are called Catholic, and we pray that he would have great anointing upon him to lead them in a godly way. So that's how I don't see him in any way being a spiritual leader that impacts my life.
All right. So to try to paraphrase you to answer to Debbie's question, you might see him as spiritually important, somebody to listen to, and
Because he carries a lot of weight.
Because he carries a lot of weight. Obviously, it's going to be hard to become the leader of a church if you don't actually have strong beliefs and are influential in these things.
I don't know how many billions of people follow that.
Exactly. But not somebody who has jurisdiction over you. So it'd be kind of like, hey, that judge in New York, I'm sure he's really smart at being a judge, but I live in Texas. So while I might listen to that judge's rulings and find them insightful, they have no impact on me in any sense of a legal authority.
And so in that sense, even with the judge, I would feel the freedom to actually disagree with maybe his point of view or the way he adjudicated a situation. I feel the same way with the Pope. I feel a freedom because he does not, I'm not in an allegiance with him, so I can disagree with him.
So, just out of curiosity, since you are the pastor at Emmanuel Worship Center, which meets here on Sundays, is Emmanuel Worship Center, is it a Protestant church? Is it non-denominational? Where do you fit in the zones?
Well, we actually call ourselves a kingdom church.
Ah.
Because that's what God has been calling us to embrace, incorporate, and to become, because that's what Jesus came to do, was to, and he said, preach the gospel of the kingdom. So we've been trying to get back to letting everything that Jesus spoke, everything that Holy Spirit is teaching us about what he spoke, we're trying to let that be what guides us. And for instance, right now, because it's really fascinating, we've been studying the Tabernacle of David, which has some massive implications of how the church should function, and get away from the massive cathedrals that point to what man can do, and get back to I'm going to say that because this is fitting in here. Okay, the tent or the Tabernacle of David, we estimate it costs maybe $100. It's just an open tent, and the Ark of the Covenant that's all that's there. Then there was the Tabernacle of Moses, which probably was anywhere from, something under 100 million. All of the tapestries, the gold, all that was there. Then there was the temple of Solomon, which may have cost almost 200 billion. One of the most elaborate of sanctuaries of all time. The only one he wants to rebuild is the $100 tent. So it's getting away from.
I'm sure that's easier to clean and sure that's easier to clean and upkeep. Yeah.
Because
I don't have to worry about the 16 guest houses and
yeah, because
mowing the lawn.
Because in that tent he's the only focus. That's why I think so much, because I've been to Europe. I've been to the cathedrals. I've been to St. Peter's Square. I've been to the Basilica. I've seen these things, and I've been to Venice, and some of the inside there's more gold than I could even imagine. It's just in the designs of the ceilings, It just goes
can be
on.
very awe-inspiring.
But it draws the attention to the architect, the artist. The Tabernacle of David draws attention to the presence of God. And so that's why he wants that. So I'm trying to learn how to refocus and get away from the massive structures and the massive organizations and come back to what's important.
Yeah, and to Debbie's question, if you are confused, please do not feel bad. It is confusing. For people who grew up in the Catholic Church, it is very hard to rewire your brain to how Protestants' brains work, because there's no hierarchy. Every church kind of, I don't want to say does its own thing, but it's very loosely organized. And for Protestants, it is almost impossible to understand how Catholic brains work, because we kind of have this assumption, it's like, well, the Pope is your boss, and you just kind of do whatever he says. Well, the Pope's not a dictator. The Pope doesn't, even with the doctrine of papal infallibility, it's not just, well, whatever the Pope says, and if the Pope says, hey, French toast is the best breakfast, then every Catholic will eat French toast from then on for the rest of their life. That's not how it works. Even the Pope, even though the Pope kind of, in my understanding, works more like the Supreme Court does, where you can disagree with the Pope, but he does have the final say in terms of, hey, we had a vote, this is the decision that was made. You don't have to agree with me, but that's what the Supreme Court ruled, et cetera. I'm oversimplifying for the
So he sets
the
the direction for the church. And he is that final voice that sets that
very important
for
in that
the
sense.
Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But not for, I don't know of any Protestant congregations that would follow him.
To my knowledge, no Protestant denomination recognizes the Pope as the head of their church. I think that's one of the theses that Luther brought up. So even the Reformed ones, even the ones that are the closest to the Catholic Church, don't recognize him as the head of the church. That being said, again, Debbie, it's understandable to be confused because there's very different Protestant churches that have different structures to them.
Right.
And the Orthodox churches, you have the I guess it would be equivalent to a bishop. It's like the patriarchs are in charge of this area, or an archbishop. They're in charge of this area, but even they don't have final say. They administrate the area much like the Pope does, but they can't like institute a ruling. They have to go back and say, okay, we're going to collectively have a vote and stuff like that. And so, the Protestant churches are just much more locally led, which ends up with a whole bunch of different organizational structures.
Now, it gets really fascinating with the Jewish versus the Catholic, because there's really been a real break there between the two.
Right. Well, okay. Yeah. So yeah, just to reemphasize for the, again, as they're saying, one of the key things about Protestants is, again, was that break off from that hierarchy. And so because of that, you do see a lot of, there's many Protestant denominations, and you don't have so many varieties with of Catholic churches. You see, it's much.
Yeah, they live
more
up to the
structured.
name. There's so many Protestant churches that are protesting their own churches, and they break up into it's just like it's
and you'll
it's
have church
Protestants of
splits.
Protestants of Protestants of Protestants. It's crazy.
That's a good way of putting it. So Protestants, but I will say, there's a whole very interesting history, right? So it started off, there was just there's the Protestants, and then it broke off into different types of. It's very variegated is the word.
Yeah,
But
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Just before we give the illusion that the Protestants are just this crazy mob of people doing what not have you, because one of the benefits of the Catholic Church, one of the things I hear from Catholics is the unity that has. Like, we are one body in Christ. Protestants seem to be in rebellion. And to Monty's point earlier, I think the argument is the goal of the Protestant Church is to be led and to be in union with Christ.
exactly.
To say, like, okay, yes, we have different political structures that govern us and administrate us, but that's a worldly question. And you can organize a church in a whole bunch of different ways. The goal is that we are all led by the Spirit. We all have Christ as our head. And even though we might look a little different, even though we might be organized, we might vote on Sundays or whatever and have the structure, and we have a board versus a set of people. That's all worldly questions. The idea we are all still in one body with Christ, even though we might look and organize different.
Right. There's a structure, the governance, and then like peripheral theological matters of things like there's peripheral theological matters, but in general there's a lot of unity throughout the Protestant world on the main theological points. And then just a quick side note, I told Bob I would answer your question, and my answer is I don't know. It's a great question though. I was looking at it. Because in Hebrew the word gever can be man or rooster, and that's in the Hebrew, and similarly in Aramaic. And so could it have been that? Yes, it's possible. Is that a definitive yes? It's not definitive, but it's definitely plausible. That's a great question, Bob.
No, it is. Yeah, I wrote myself a note earlier. I'm going to do research on that later. So as a wrapping up of this question, just from a historical point of view, I do want to say a word of defense for the artists and such that built the cathedrals, and especially in the Orthodox Church and such, that while, much like we were talking about with the holidays that have become very much focused on what they weren't intended to be, many of the artists that painted those things and built those things wanted you to see God. They didn't want you to see them. There's some that intentionally didn't want anybody to know they were the ones that did it. Because the design of the building was to draw your eye to the Lord, to remind you of His majesty. Now, if that happened in real life and what happened afterwards, much like we talked about the holidays being corrupted by worldly concerns and becoming more symbols of power and prestige for monarchs rather than what the original intent might have been. I just wanted to speak in the defense of the dead. The other thing is, following up with Debbie, we do have a new pope. We did not get a chance last week to acknowledge that and congratulate him on his his position. So what have your first impressions been of the Pope? I mean, I can say for mine, just to buy you some time to think. I don't think anybody has an opinion on the Pope. People have snap judgments, but we can't really judge a Pope for like at least 3 or 4 years. Nobody has any idea what this Pope's stances are going to be, what they believe, and even if a Pope goes into an office saying yada yada yada, and that office the weight of it tends to have an impact on you. But from what I've heard of the cardinals who voted, I believe the intent was to have not somebody who was super progressive or super conservative, to have somebody who could be a bridge, to be a unifying force in the church, to say, okay, we're not picking teams. That's not what the church is about. We're not saying, okay, well, these guys had their turn, so now we get my guy. It's like, no, we are one people. And I don't know if he'll be neutral. I don't know if he'll be one side or the other. Some people, the thing I found interesting is that I listened on the news, and of course, listen to a Protestant country of America's news agencies talking about their authority in the Pope. You will get all kinds of wacky insights. But both conservative and liberal channels were both screaming to high heavens, like, we won, we got the good guy, and he's our guy now, and he's going to stick it to the other ones. And so to have both sides of the political aisle singing your praises, I think, is telling that he has a chance to be a bridge builder, and that is my hope for what he'll be. But we'll see. It'll take 3 or 4 years for him to actually settle into his role.
Yeah, I've heard very strong opinions both ways, and I'm not it's a little bit above my pay grade.
I
I'll
think,
just say that.
one of the politicians said that to try to put something as eternal as the church into the box of Republicans versus Democrats in America is not going to work.
Well, and there's other dimensions too. In addition to political things, there's questions about some of his policy decisions and leadership in the past, things like that, which are apolitical. But so it's a complex question. I'm not gonna comment on it. I'm just because it is above my pay grade a bit. But I will say that he's I know a lot of. We'll wait and see. So I think that's what we'll do. But he's from Chicago. He's a mathematician though, from Chicago.
Oh, very nice.
That's so. But he likes math. But he's also a Bulls fan, and when I was a Spurs fan, so. But then there's more serious things though. Yeah. That again, those things I won't
he
get
grew
into.
up in Naperville, which my sister lived in Naperville for a few years. So for all I know, they could have met.
We'll see what happens.
Very nice. All right, so we're actually making good time tonight. So going to do Matthew 26 verses 36 through 46. Jesus prays at Gethsemane. I always say that wrong. All right. At that time, Yeshua went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he told them, "Sit here a while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is consumed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." So we got a question here from Kathleen from Tampa, Florida. She says, "I Googled the Garden of Gethsemane and found out that some of the olive trees there are over 2,000 years old. That means Yeshua likely prayed under those very same trees. I also saw that the garden is located on the Mount of Olives. Which is a very large mountain, that oversees Jerusalem. What struck me was that there were no other trees on the other parts of the mountain, only in the garden. Why are these trees only in the garden and not across the rest of the Mount of Olives?"
Well, actually, there are, in fact, you can look at certain pictures. We were there a few years ago, and there's olive trees scattered all around. Now, a lot of it's rock, but there's a lot. In fact, there's even a few like cypress, the skinny Italian-looking cypress trees that are there too. but it is called the Mount of Olives. So it was, I think, from its beginning, historically, it's been a place of olive orchards. And in at the very base of it is where the Garden of Gethsemane is. And there are some ancient trees. Now, it used to be you could just go in and walk among the trees. Now, because people were taking souvenirs from the trees and damaging the trees
Shocker.
and that, so they had to actually, it's now fenced off. You can't get to it, but you can see them. And you can get close to some of them that are massive. I mean, there's no way it would take 2 or 3 people with their arms like this to go the full circumference around one of the trees. I mean, and they're ancient. Whether they were there, I think if they were there, they were probably small, not the ones that he necessarily would pray under. But there are massive, ancient, old olive trees in that garden, and it's a special place. If you haven't been, you need to go. I don't know if I'm missing the primary part. As I said, there are trees. Even up towards the top, there are a scattering of olive trees around you, but it was primarily a mountain full of olive groves. I think that's where it got its name.
Right. And then the other thing to keep in mind is you had Jerusalem is the most fought over city, and so you if you're going to be having people coming down during sieges, things like this, during the Crusades, they're going to have deforestation when the armies are coming through. But again, that if I need to double check this, but I believe that during some of the sieges, a lot of the olive trees that were on the Mount of Olives were torn down to make so that the soldiers could go through. And so that's a great question, and I think it's because it was fought over so much. But it is I need to great question. But the olives are very old. I mean, the olive trees there are very, very old, and so there's something really special about that. I remember reading somewhere that there's some of the oldest olive trees that we know of in the world that have been measured are in the Garden of Gethsemane. So there's something, it's really wonderful there, and if you have a chance to go there, and also think about this. If this is on Passover, this would have been, it's a lunar calendar. So that would have happened when Yeshua was in the Garden of Gethsemane. It would have happened on a full moon too. So you could imagine that night on a full moon with all the stars out when they came to arrest him. It was quite a scene.
Yeah, from a historical perspective, it's actually really interesting because the Ottoman Empire, when they ruled over that area, absolutely ravaged the land. They deforested the entire region, both for fuel, but also I think to impoverish the locals because they were rebelling so much. And as the empire was collapsing, it became more important to how do I put this? Make the people less capable of rebelling, to make the land less habitable. But olive trees, because we get olive oil and stuff, are not really good fuel sources. And so there's very little reason for them to take that and use it for the machines. And because olive oil does produce something valuable, they would be reducing their own tax base. So ironically, the olive trees, outside of the spiritual significance of it, the Ottomans didn't take those for the value of them.
Do you know why they would leave Gethsemane intact, out of curiosity?
Nope. I think David's got the answer right here.
Yeah, reading that the Ottoman Empire would tax your trees. That's
would
why nobody
tax the
had
trees.
trees, because there would be a tax on it. It's
Okay.
kind of like how they have Spanish Empire. You see all these Spanish missions with only one steeple finish. Because if you complete it, it's taxed. If it's incomplete, you don't tax it. So they don't have one steeple rather than two. So, it's a lot of these Spanish missions only have one and two steeples complete for the same reason.
Okay, so we're there's some real reasons why here that we're getting here. Yeah, that's
No, yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, there's a lot of things that, I hate to go to the money reasons, but yeah, taxes is shockingly common in history. That there's several things that are clearly swords, but because swords are taxed and illegal, it was technically a knife, even though it was like 3 feet long.
right.
It was legally just shy of a sword, so they could have it. And all kinds of people that mess with the law that way. I mean, that's why we had the whole debate in the 90s of whether or not a tomato is a fruit or a vegetable, because one of them is taxed and the other one is not. And so the
Taxation is funny. You can go to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and you were taxed based on how much land was between your house and the road. So all the houses were built right next to the
oh, that's
road.
fascinating. and that becomes a cultural thing where all the houses, and they ask like, why do you do this? It's just our culture. It's like, and people forget why they did this
Why they did
originally,
initially.
which becomes its own rabbit trail. But anyway, the thing that's fascinating about all the trees being torn down, which again goes back to David's point of like, well, you'd be inclined to uproot all these things. The California wildfires that recently happened, there was a lot of monetary incentives to not clear the underbrush of your house.
Okay.
And so it became difficult for people to maintain their land just because of the bureaucratic inertia in it. That's a whole other conversation. But when the Jews came back after World War II, they started planting a whole bunch of trees. And the locals were like, you're insane. This place is a desert. We have like 4 cups of water, and you're going to give 3 of them to a tree?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, guys, believe me, we used to live here. Trust me, there used to be forests here. Like there haven't been for 100 years, but they used to be. And so, but ironically, what they did was they planted trees all over the place because the Jews, having been exiled to every corner of the earth, had learned agriculture from every inhospitable territory on the earth. And they brought all that knowledge back. And it's like, trust me, we have lived in the freaking Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
We can make things grow. And they took all that cumulative knowledge, taught each other. And what happened was when the trees were there, they started to respirate, and it started to condense the water in the air. It cooled the area. It started to rain more and actually made the area much more habitable.
Right. Yeah, and I know it's funny. I know it's funny that you talk about that about because we're talking about Garden Gethsemane and agriculture and all that. There was this is just a story. There was a master's student I knew at University of Texas. He was working in Middle Eastern studies. So he's a master's student, a smart guy. So if you're getting a master's, right? He's very anti-Israel. And I asked him, he said the whole blooming of the desert is completely false. And I showed him a satellite map from Google Earth of the border between Israel and Egypt. And I say, you could see the border very clearly there. That's green and that's brown. And he said, well, that's just made up. I'm like, that's Google Earth. You could find your own house on there. And you're saying there, so there's a level of delusion that you could see so much.
It's like looking at the map and you see like South Korea is all lit up and North Korea doesn't have a single light bulb on.
Exactly. I mean, there's some things where just those satellite images really, you could see it with your own 2 eyes there. And so anyway, so yeah, there was that you could see that really clear difference there. Yeah.
Can I ask you, you're a language expert.
I'm a language student, yeah, but
Because I had looked this up. It doesn't seem to have a meaning. You can look up in any dictionary, and Gethsemane doesn't have a meaning other than a garden outside of Jerusalem. That's what all of the dictionaries and encyclopedias say. Does it not have a meaning?
that is, okay, so I'll tell you what I've read and I'll tell you what I know. I've read that it means an olive press.
That's why I was
But
asking the question.
I've read that means an olive press. Do I know that it means that? No, because I know the word in Hebrew. So I'm wondering if it's Aramaic because I know good deal of Hebrew, but the biblical Aramaic I know less of because it's a dead language, and no, Hebrew is a live language, so I could speak it. Aramaic I know less of, so I would have to
So
double check
because
that.
you're doing this off the top of your head,
Uh-huh.
I just asked ChatGPT, so take it with a grain of salt, about the etymology of Gethsemane. And it's saying that it comes from either Aramaic or Hebrew, like you said, from the terms gat and shemanim. Which
means oil, means a shemini, yeah, that oil, right?
So it's saying exactly what you said.
Oh,
So
get
gat
shemen
meaning
is
press,
and then shemen is
shemini
oil.
meaning
Oh,
oil.
but not olive. That's where I was getting lost on. Yeah, so shemen, right? Right. Shemen means oil or fat, and then
Which
gat.
makes sense because it's called the Mount of Olives.
Right, get shemini is okay. There we go. Yeah, that makes. I was looking for the word olive, which is zait.
It makes
And
sense
I
that
was
it would
looking
be
for
at the
zait, and
foot
I
of
couldn't
the
see
Mount of
zait in
Olives,
there.
because that's where you would take all the olives to press it.
Right. Okay. So there you go. I was looking for the word zait, which means olive, and I couldn't see it in there. But then if you go get shemini means the press of oil. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Neat.
Well, he was pressed.
You have a quick question?
I think the Bible has a requirement in establishing a garden that they have to have a press in it. That's what that's the inclination that the Book of Psalms and other places in the Old Testament talk about when you have a garden, that in it you have a tower
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have a press.
Ah, wonderful. That's
Interesting.
great.
Not
Yeah.
heard that. Alrighty. So we have Matthew 26, verse 39. Says, first of all, thank you, Kathleen, for that question. I know we went down a bit of a rabbit trail, but that was really cool. So Matthew 26, 39. Going a little farther, he fell face down and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then Yeshua returned to the disciples and found them sleeping. "Were you not able to keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not enter into temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." A second time he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot pass unless I drink it, may your will be done." And again Yeshua returned and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed for a third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to his disciples and said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. See, my betrayer is approaching." So we've got a question here. In this verse, Jesus prays for something he obviously desperately wants, but also accepts that he won't get it. Yet, Christ also teaches us to be persistent in prayer. So he's got a few verses here, all along the same themes of asking and not giving up, talking about the verse in Samuel where the mother is rewarded because she's super persistent, and basically just saying, annoy the judge until he gives you what you want. Got a series of verses about that. So how do we know when to pray unceasingly for something and when to accept that the answer is no? When do we throw in the towel?
Well, for one thing, let me just say, this is not a prayer where Jesus is asking, he has a petition before his Father to receive something. This is a prayer of surrender. This is him understanding, Father, you're asking me, I fully understand where this is taking me. I know what this cup is going to be. I know, and I see it really kind of threefold. You know, the fact that he's going to consume the sin of all mankind. He's going to be judged by Father severely because of all of that sin and be separated from him. He said, is there any other way this can happen? But yet in his heart he knew, because he knew why he came, I know there is not another way. So he kept saying, not my will, but your will be done. So one of the things, now, if it's I just wrote an article. Let me just say this: if the Word says you can have it, then you can have it. It just requires your faith in your heart, the soil of your heart, to be clear from all unbelief and doubt, so that you can receive it. And that's, you're actually asking for something that He has already provided, and you're going to tap into what the Word has already given you. But this is different. This is surrender. And we all go through these times. I know 2 or 3 times in my life where I was saying, Lord, I recognize this chapter's ending. What are you asking of me? And he would tell me, I want you to go and do this. And I'd say, basically, in my own heart, I was afraid you would ask that. I don't really want to do that. I remember one time, 4 mornings in a row, He told me to do something. And I said, God, I don't want to do it. But on the 5th day, I said, I'm just going to, if perchance you would change your mind, I'm coming back one more time. And he never said a word. And I said, I understand. This is what you do. So I just tell you, my heart yields. I say yes. And I'm going to do what you asked me to do. And that scenario has happened in my life at least 3 times. And I've always viewed myself in the parable of the father that asked a son, would you do this? And he says yes, and he didn't. And then he goes to the second son, would you do this? He said no, but he later repented and did it. I've always felt like, because Jesus said, so which one did the will of the Father? The one that actually did it. I don't think he minds that there is a wrestling match in your spirit and heart as you wrestle with embracing something that your flesh really doesn't want to do. But you have to wrestle with it to the point. And that's what this is. This is a wrestling in his own spirit of coming to this place of literally saying what Jesus said. Let's get up and go. My betrayer's here. Let's get this thing done. I'm in. But you have to go through the process at times, realizing what you're asking. And am I willing to lay everything down that I've built to this point and just embrace this next chapter? And you come to the place you say, yes, Lord. So there's this. This is purely a prayer of surrender, not a prayer of asking to receive something.
Okay. So your advice for this person would be more of in the line of try to figure out if what you're asking for is something you're asking for you, or if it's something that is His will.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially if it's something that if in your heart you know I don't think this is the will of God, but I want it really bad. A lot of mistakes are made because we want something so bad we can taste it, and yet we hear in our spirit God says, this is not my plan. And so in life, maybe many people never come to the place they say yes. They've made a habit of just saying no and walking away and doing their own thing and paying the consequences. What I have found every time in which I've said yes and it's been a struggle, what happened next was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Okay. Well, we don't know the details of why this person is asking this question, so I imagine we could probably do a what-if game for a while of the details. So I guess the main advice, if I'm understanding you guys correctly, would be not to pray yes or no question, but to pray, okay, because sometimes we think, hey, we did what the Lord wanted us to do, and now we don't know what to do with it. So more to be pray, okay, how do you want me to deal with this situation?
See, let's give you, for instance. Now, I'm one who totally believes. I teach it. I practice it. The Word says, God said, I sent my word and healed you and delivered you from all your destruction. He says, I forgive all your iniquities. I heal all your diseases. Jesus went around healing. I could go on and on and on with the verses. I totally believe that the Word says we are healed. So when I'm persistent and I'm not seeing the healing. I just what I've come to conclusion is, then if I'm not seeing the healing, then I've got to get back into the Word until the Word gets my heart back into the place that it can receive without any doubt or unbelief. Because the Word is what washes us and cleanses us and prepares us, because it's the Word that has the promise, and it's the Word that actually has all the power to bring it forth. So everything in life is tied to us getting absorbed in the Word. So if you're not willing to get consumed and abide, John 15:7 says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you can ask anything you want and it'll be done. Now that's a promise, but it's all tied to the Word, you abiding in Him and the Word abiding in you.
Nice. Bob, do you have a quick question, comment?
On the how to pray in situations like this, if it's an open-ended prayer, that's one thing. You can persist in persist in asking. But this was a prophecy that was to be fulfilled. Therefore, it is not open-ended. It is. It had to be completed. And my one question is: was not this thoroughly discussed earlier at the meeting of Transfiguration? When was that not their discussion?
Was what the discussion of?
About Jesus going to the cross, the severity of Moses and them showing up was to tell him, this has got to be done.
Right. So I think that is getting into what was discussed at the mount, that Transfiguration mount, of recognizing that this is in fact what's going on, and so now it's just a question of Jesus emotionally.
Right. Okay.
I mean, you can know things in your head, but like then there's actually going through with it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and again, the whole
Okay,
point.
so I think Bob's comment might be to say like, hey, maybe Moses and them were there to
like fulfilling it.
I don't know to say if I want to say give confirmation, but like to give encouragement to Christ, to give him conviction, to say like, look, this is the thing.
Right. In Transfiguration, Moses again, he represents the Torah, and Elijah the prophets, and so. Right. So if you don't hear online, he said
a reminder of the when he said when Moses at the rock when he didn't strike, and was it that he didn't strike, or was it that he did strike twice?
He was supposed to speak to it. He struck it twice. Right.
Okay, he was supposed to speak to it, and he struck it twice. Okay, that's what it was. So, but saying that he was not obeying in that moment and the ramifications of that.
Right. And so, yeah, that's a great insight, Bob. Yeah, that's a really great insight there. And I think that it is, again, we're talking about, this question is about praying unceasing. So Bob did bring up a great point that this is something that was already supposed to happen. It's already been prophesied. These were things that were supposed to happen. So then the question is about praying unceasingly, or when to throw in the towel. That is, I think Pastor Monty gave a really good insight about what are you asking for. So, the question is, if I ask, that's a really good answer. I think that's a good answer, because I could be praying every morning for a Lamborghini. And the question is, okay, whose glory is that for? Is that for my glory? Or is it I'm going to go out in a Lamborghini and somehow am I going to use this for
Well, you don't understand. If I put a Jesus sticker on the back of the Lamborghini,
right,
that's going to make everyone
put
want to
a little
convert.
fish on there.
So
just maybe I'll be the first rabbi with
it's
a
really
Lamborghini.
for other people.
And
You want a Rolex too?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So the question is where the question is that. And now here's the other thing that's tough about this is there's sometimes that it's certainly that what you're asking for is certainly not a selfish thing. Sometimes you're praying for healing for a loved one, for instance, and these things. The question of praying without ceasing is
it is this is like when or versus when to throw in the towel. Again, if it's, I think the question is, how is God going to answer? God answers the way He answers. He knows when and how to answer. If you're praying for a loved one's healing, I would say pray without ceasing. How is God going to answer that? That depends on Him. God may give, for instance, in the example of healing, God may give you healing of the body, or it may be a healing of the soul. For instance, if you have, if you lose a limb, for instance, the healing may be how to survive with that limb and have a good life, life without that. Survive without the limb, have a good life without that limb. You glorify Him without that. If you lose an arm or a leg or something, and so that may be the healing. That may not be what you're asking for, but what I'm saying is that yes, if it's something that is for His glory, pray without ceasing. We don't know how it's going to answer. If it's something that you're just praying for a Lamborghini so people could see how cool you are, then you could go ahead and cease. If it's just for your glory and not for His, then I think you really need to reconsider why you are praying. So
See, really, one of the
right.
pattern in Jesus, He had a relationship with Father.
Right.
When we have a relationship with Father, we know His heart. We hear His heart. Holy Spirit reveals things to us. So we pray with a whole lot more. Okay, I'll just give you real quick because we're out of time. I remember one time when I got the call that my father was not going to last but for a few hours. And on the way, I said, God, what's going on here? And He said, go tell your father that he is going to live and not die. I went and revealed and said that over him. He lived for several years. So once I heard what Father was saying to me, my faith shot through the roof. I walked in with absolute 100% authority. I knew what was going to happen. And I declared it to him, and he lived. So it's all, everything, when we get it down, it's all out of a relationship. And don't get it's not like a formula, okay, under this circumstance you pray this way, no, it's a relationship. And just sink yourself into that relationship with Him. It's good.
Thank you, gentlemen. And obviously this is a question that is, we don't know what the details are, but it does seem like the person's hurting. So I do want to leave you with the encouragement. And if you do want to talk further, just contact the number, which got on the screen there. It says Roy Garcia at sa@gmail.com, or the QR code there you can scan, or you can text the number on the screen. And we're also finding the Facebook Messenger. For those of you watching online, if you ever do want to send in a question, we are monitoring the YouTube chat. So feel free to say something in. David will wave us down and let us know that there's a question on the screen. And Roy's usually following his text messages and such. But I believe that takes us to the end of the night. We're meeting next week, correct? All right. Excellent. More reason to celebrate. So for everybody else, we're going to have our Aaronic benediction. Thank you all for coming, and have a blessed evening.
Yivrechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yaher Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach.